Okay.
All right, are we good to get started, Darren?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Welcome everyone on October 29th to the Student Engagement and Experience Committee. We have a full agenda today. We will be talking about the issue of attendance, particularly with the Everyday Counts Relaunch Summit, and any debrief from Representative O'Leary or myself from the annual national conference from state boards of education. We'll also be talking about what we see as the commitment to reducing chronic attendance from the State Board of Education, updates to the student attendance survey, the voter registration updates initiative, supports for LGBTQ plus students in DC schools, and also understanding a design map for chronic absenteeism done by Dr. Darren Fleischer. Does anyone have any additional items that need to be discussed today in our meeting? All right. So I want to jump in, starting talking about attendance, particularly the Everyday Counts Task Force meeting. The Everyday Counts Task Force meets quarterly. Currently, it is important to know that there are particular working groups on particular issue areas for that, such as safety, such as communications with schools, and a variety of other groups. Are there any major ideas that our committee would like to lift up? And Anna, given that you also sit on that task force, are there any things that you would like for the state board to know or for the working group to entertain?
I have so far only been to one meeting, but it seemed like a pretty good, like they seem pretty in tune with equity, which honestly was my biggest concern going into it, that it would be a lot of repeated stuff about just how students don't show up to school and blah blah blah. I think that the mo the my main concern is student voices, and I know that they are looking for other student members, but I think that we should really emphasize many like diverse ways of getting student voices represented and having other students on the committee, which I know they are also looking at. But I think that that should be something that we place a lot of emphasis on.
Yeah, I agree. Khalid, do you have anything you want to add to that? All right. Yeah, I think
I
that
just actually, I'm sorry. I
go for
think
it.
Khalik, I just made him co-host, so he might want to share anything. Khalik, are you able to join us? Okay. I think we're good. I
All right. Yeah, I'll comment on that point and then feel free to jump in, Representative O'Leary. I think, Anna, we have we're getting to it a little bit later in our meeting, but this might be a time to kind of just naturally move that up in looking at a student survey. Um, so there have been some delays with that, but we have to come up with a new plan of action for how to particularly get student voices on this topic. Um, Representative O'Leary, do you want to talk to any things about the task force or about any attendance takeaways that you had from the NASB conference?
No, I no, there wasn't anything. I didn't see anything that was. I wasn't in attendance. Were we in attendance? I don't think I was in a committee or a workshop on that. And my entire concern has to do with the fact that the systems don't seem to have any way to cure the attendance of students. Right now, it's the end of October, and there are students that have had 18 days of absence already. What are the systems doing about that? So what is the foul up about or that's probably the wrong word, about the survey not being implemented?
Yeah, I think that this would be a good time to segue there. One of the main takeaways that I want everyone and the public to know is just like from one of the keynote addresses that first day, Representative Valier, when we were in that freezing room, they had mentioned how the two main things that the superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools, like, we need a robust way of being able to target chronic absenteeism and make sure students are coming to school. And then also making sure that we have strategies to reduce teacher retention. So I think there is a greater urgency, and that's also planning on what I plan to testify at the attendance hearing later on in November. But I think this would be a good time, Darren, to update folks on what our options are for surveying student voice with the work of this committee.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that last part. With
Just, I
Oh.
think moving up the changes and making sure everyone is aware of the changes to the timeline for the survey.
Yes, okay. Let me just share my screen on that. And just to quickly add to the NASB discussion. There was a session that we sat in on that had an interesting topic on using an attendance value add in the attendance in accountability system. So that was just something I can share out at some point, but it's like another way to build that in to see like what schools are at the school level, what a school is doing to improve attendance for students. But let me just open this.
On the agenda, there's it talks about a statement of SBOE commitment to reducing chronic absenteeism. Did we pass that already? I mean, when I say pass it, did we already skip over the statement itself?
No, Fraser, we're going there next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen and just really quickly walk you all through this. So
Oh, I have.
just some quick updates. Can you all see this screen?
Yeah.
Great. So a quick update on this. So we were supposed to we put together the survey, came up with a statement of work, hired a vendor. They created a survey based on feedback from the state board, from partner agencies. It was completed in September. It was supposed to be distributed in October, and then a report was to be drafted and published up until the end of the year. Since the target audience or the target subjects were middle school students and high school students, as well as elementary school parents, it introduced an issue around getting approval to have human subjects in a study like this. And so there's something called an IRB approval process. So institutional review board, they would look at it, make sure that there's little to no harm to human subjects. In the case of this, just because it's students, this is like a month-long process that we would need to do. Additionally, once we get that approval, we'd have to get approval from DC Public Schools to distribute the surveys. And that's another like month-long process. So there are some challenges to this. Another issue is the panorama survey going out in October and March, which asks school climate questions. And so distributing the survey in October, November, December, it just is not likely not going to happen. Well, we're in November now, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately. And so just speaking with a team and thinking about what we could possibly do around this is I created 3 options. since we have our survey, we have an instrument to ask students and parents about what are the barriers to getting to schools, or the schools with the highest chronic absenteeism. What are the barriers for them getting to school? What are the drivers? What gets them to the school? What are their experiences when they come late to school? These are still things that we can possibly explore. And so our options are, one, to go to the DC Education Research Collaborative and just see if they're able to take on this work. They would be the ones to do the IRB in the first place. They would be the best option to get approval for this. But just see, are they able to collaborate with us and partner with us to help get the survey out? And I see Eric, Representative Goulet is in. So I'm going to just promote him to panelist. Bear with me, I'm just letting Representative Goulet in. Okay. And so the advantage to this option one is that we could still move forward with just getting some information and publishing that information. And so this is just an idea of like what that process would look like, where we would seek IRB approval through December. New members, leadership, a possible leadership change in January 2025, a board retreat, and possible restructuring of the committees. But this work could be ongoing during that time. And so revisit whether we should stick with the survey or change it up a little bit. That might be one next step with them. And so distributing the surveys later in spring 2025 and a report later in July 2025. It's not guaranteed. So the next step, if we go with this, would be to reach out to Education Research Collaborative and get their bandwidth and whether they're able to take this on. Another option is to not do the survey and just do informal collection of information. And this gives us a bit more flexibility, and it doesn't mean we have to scrap everything from the survey. We could still use some of the questions from the survey, but we wouldn't be able to publish a formal study. This would be more going into schools, asking students, going into the schools, or maybe just looking at one school as, or like maybe a few schools as a case study that have high chronic absenteeism, and asking students similar questions to what's on the survey. But this actually builds in flexibility, where we could also talk to the attendance counselors, the principals, some of the teachers, something that the survey didn't allow. And so this is like a plan C, if you will, if the Education Research Collaborative isn't able to take this on. I don't think we would need an IRB for this because this is not a study, and we're not really putting anyone in any harm. And so what that schedule, or what I propose, is still meet with the Education Research Collaborative, just ask them maybe their thoughts on it, but also begin listening sessions or speak like members going into schools within their wards, or rethinking what that would look like going into the school, and identifying who we would want to talk to, what that would look like, and then really identifying like what is the why for that approach, like how would we use that information. Just as a committee, you would come up with how would you, like what are the people you want to, who are the people you want to talk to, and how you would use that information. So for example, understanding the needs of particular schools and then lifting that up or advocating for that, or generating just new questions that we could ask if we come back around and do a survey.
Thank you,
But
Derek.
yeah,
What do others think about the best approach given the current situation that Darren shared?
Well, if as I said before, if we're going to be talking to students, we need to find those students that aren't going to school and find out why. And if that panorama survey um, is surveying students that are in school, did you do that at? Did y'all do that at Capital City, Ben?
We didn't have panorama, no. We had like the district survey that students needed to take. But we didn't enter things in panorama like DCBS schools do.
Yeah, I don't remember if I think that when I was talking to the lady from, or somebody said that they started that in 2018, the panorama survey. So that was a year after I retired. But Anna would know about it. Educate us, Anna.
Know about like
The panorama
panorama.
survey. Yeah.
Okay, well, I am not a fan of the panorama survey. I think that generally the attitude of students is that we take it when we're forced to. And like I haven't taken it this year just because teachers are like, I'm like, teachers aren't invested, students aren't invested. So that makes it relatively not inaccurate, but like not holistic measure of student experience. I am personally a fan of option two. I think that talking to students and people in schools is a much more effective way to gauge what it is actually like. I think that surveys are great for gathering widespread information, but I think that the main the best way to address absenteeism is addressing the actual needs of students and not like statistics of what generally students think, because I think that there are a few standout reasons that are often emotional for students to not come to school that can't necessarily be communicated in a survey. And I think that talking one-on-one to teachers and students and guidance counselors would convey that much better than statistics from a survey would.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Right. So I think the issue here, just to move us along and to kind of name some things that I'm hearing both of you say, is that like we need to reach students, right? And that was the original intended goal. And so I think that we should still go with option one, which is having the Education Research Collaborative continue to go through the proper channels of making sure we have IRB approval, then being able to push it out in the spring when we can, and then to continue to try and figure out pathways to be able to figure out what things are holding students back and what things would work. I mean, a lot of that is going to be done at a school by school level at the NASB conference, in the chronic absenteeism session. Like a lot of this was about disaggregating data and making sure that we have particular information on particular students and that there are particular people who have relationships who can then meet those needs, whatever they may be, mental health, transportation, bullying, you name it. So like I'm curious if other people are on board with, for at least the moment, moving forward with the survey, even at a delayed date, continuing to figure out ways we can work on finding out and amplifying student voice, and then also just weighing in on this conversation with what we know will be useful and work as the council takes up this issue in the coming month.
I do think that I agree. I think that there is no reason to not pursue IRB approval right now. I do think that we should continue to consider alternative approaches as we keep doing research, and maybe we could base that off of the results of the survey, assuming that it gets approved and distributed. But I do like the ideas behind option two, and I think that we should carry those throughout all of the research and whatever paths we decide to take in the future.
and just to add a little bit more context to it, if we partner with the Education Research Collaborative and they provide their own expertise and thoughts on the survey, we would not be able to start the IRB approval until, until that survey is finalized. So we've heard some additional feedback from DC Public Schools on like the distribution of them, like everything would need to be finalized so that when it goes through the approval process, we could say, this is exactly what the students are going to be asked. This is exactly how we're going to reach the students. So that they can say, yes, this is okay to move forward. So it would take another meeting, I think, with the Education Research Collaborative. And again, it's not guaranteed that they would be able to move forward with this or that we get approval.
I still think we should try. I think that I know that we all have a lot of ideas about distribution. I think this is like a great opportunity to learn from like the SAC and various other stakeholders about the best ways to reach students who aren't going to school. As Representative O'Leary has said, like it's a challenge, and this is a good way to start to address that challenge. If it ends up taking months and months and months, then maybe we should look to alternatives. But for now, I do think that we should continue.
Representative Goulet and O'Leary, you on board with that approach?
Absolutely. I think that makes sense. And I think it's a good path to get the data we need and also syncs up with the council's timeline for this. So I support it. And I do want to try to include the new board members, in this process, but I don't want to lose the opportunity to try to, at least provide the type of data in the fall that would be helpful towards, figuring out how we do our part in reducing truancy. So I support it.
I still want to just put it in everyone's head that the audience that needs to be surveyed is not the audience that they're going to do in the in the survey. I think that the idea of talking to the teachers and the counselors and the principals and targeting, finding out the names of those bodies that aren't coming to school and trying to spread it out. It'd be not a traditional kind of a survey, but it would give us the answers. It's like, trying to find out why students make D's rather than A's and surveying the A students. You'll find out all kinds of good information, but you're not going to find out anything about why a student makes a D. And if we just survey the panorama survey, and I heard what you said completely about that, about surveys, about park tests, about any kind of standardized thing like that, that it just, students aren't really that excited about taking those kinds of things anyway. But we need to survey those students who are the cause of the truancy and absentee problem. And we can get
I
those names from the counselors and the principals and the teachers.
I agree that we have to make a significant effort to reach the students who aren't going to school. I do think that there are certain ethical concerns with targeting students in terms of a survey. I am not a IRB, but I do I'm studying those to an extent right now, and I think that we can't like track down students and distribute the survey that way. I think we have to have a broad approach. I do agree that we have to be intentional, but part of doing that is targeting schools where absenteeism is so much higher. But I don't think that we can look for names.
But would there be a way to, because I hear what you're saying, Representative O'Leary, and I agree with it, is how do we target, and I'm fine with getting the academic approval of all this, but I feel like we do need to try to get to those students who are chronically truant, and we know that from the schools. So, but I also hear what Representative Mayor said on this is I don't want to try to avoid, I don't want to avoid the tough issue of trying to get to those kids. So I guess is what I'm thinking. And there's got to be a way we do that. Because we do reach out to kids that are struggling to try to provide wraparound services and resources. So I don't think it's any different if we're trying to reach out with really a survey to just understand what they need and what's going on. Because I mean, it may be if the survey responses, that they need some sort of support from the city, then we could provide that too, or we could connect them to those services. So I just feel like that's going to be a very valuable product if we directly can connect to those students, even if we have a much smaller sample set versus trying to just cast a wide net. And as you mentioned, Representative O'Leary, then getting the A students, that's not going to help us much because they're not true in the first place. So
Well, I think this is I hear what all of you are saying, and I agree with all of it. I think that I want us to keep in mind that the survey, like we've made a decision to survey schools with greater than 50% absenteeism. So we are already targeting or focusing on like the highest need schools. And then with the distribution plan that we also have through the vendor, like there's ways to learn strategies as to who can connect with the kids who maybe aren't coming to school as regularly. And maybe there's different ways to solicit input, with that regard. But I think it's to me a both and situation. Like we're getting student voice information and we are attempting to at least get the students who are most impacted. And we might need to go and think creatively or use relationships at the school level, to your point, Representative O'Leary, to make sure that students who aren't coming to school are connected to the resources or having their voices heard. So I think that's all something that is being taken into account. And that we also just need to make sure to reach out to individual schools in the interim, because based also again from the NASB conference in that session, the relationships and disaggregated data are going to be our two highest levels to pull to make sure that we are reaching students who need to be connected to their school.
Can I ask a technical question of Eric? I've got the council hearing on my phone, but nothing's going on.
are they on a recess right now or?
I don't have any idea. It's been the same screen since 4 o'clock.
You may want to refresh it. It could be that they're behind schedule, or it could have been that they took a recess.
Okay. Thank you. I'll do that.
I mean, sometimes like I'll try to just click and refresh on it, and that'll help, but doesn't always.
So the next topic that is similar before we move on to a totally new topic is that the Everyday Counts Task Force in its relaunch had kind of charged every agency with making a commitment to what to supporting curbing chronic absenteeism. So, I know that all of us are committed and that the board is generally committed. But they also wanted us to kind of identify particular things that we thought we could do, and what role we could play in the bigger conversation. So I'm curious if it would be okay if like Darren and I took the lead on drafting a statement, and then we could bring that to the working session for feedback, to be able to present just to the task force as to what role the state board could play on this issue. And then also want to know if anyone has any ideas that they would like for us to take note of so that we can incorporate them into that statement.
I think emphasizing student voices.
I think there's a number of things we could put in there that we can do. I mean, I think it's in the policies we support, and I like the effort we're engaging in now. I mean, I think a number of things we've already done is supporting, and Representative Mayor, you provided great leadership on this. So the Green New Deal for schools, trying to get the demand for the healthy school meals, I think would be very important at reducing chronic absenteeism. I think, issues that we look at, supporting school nurses, having a full-time nurse in every school to be there to make sure, kids' medical needs are being met. And then, school-based behavioral health services, I felt like are slipping backwards after a lot of progress lately. So maybe those are areas we can exercise more leadership. I'd just like to know what are you looking for us to do? Like things we can help directly with, or are you looking for us to kind of set an issue agenda that then we can put forward and say, this is how the board can support this, which is really kind of a collection of ideas that will help improve, uh, all of the various factors that lead to truancy. Like, what's your kind of objective with it?
I think it's to communicate to other agencies how we can be useful on this issue in particular. And I think the issues that you named would be things that I would mention so that like the Department of Behavioral Health or or DDOT or other agencies know that like they have a partner with us in being able to advocate for the overall well-being of students. And that and we could mention some of those things that we've already been working on as examples. But ultimately like seeing ourselves as putting forth policies, resolutions, to create a sense of belonging for students in schools, and go beyond just academic outcomes, but also overall, overall student needs, like you're saying, medical, out of school time needs. Like people need to know that we can weigh in on all of these issues that are impacting students around the city.
Makes sense.
Thank you. So I'm gonna move us forward. The only other two main issues that I have are gonna be around just a quick thing around the voter registration updates. And then I'm gonna throw it to you afterwards, Representative Mayor, on student support issues. So just wanted to update the committee that we have been able to get voter registration data from the Board of Elections, but we are waiting until a week or two after the current election to request new data, particularly just for voting age of students in DC, so that we can, moving forward, know how to support school communities that have lower voter registration rates. So I just wanted to kind of let people know that we did have a breakthrough with the Board of Elections and being able to get student data, but it would be premature at this point to act on any data right now that doesn't incorporate the timing of things after the election. Does that make sense? All right. So Representative Mayor, I want to give you space to bring up and discuss your thinking around LGBTQ student supports in DC.
Thank you. So this should not take too long. I have been thinking about the best ways to support LGBTQ plus students in schools because at Walls and in my specific community especially, there is a lot of LGBTQ people, but there is also a lot of like mental health issues that surround that. And Walls, there's one specific counselor at Walls who has been super supportive to many of those students. Without her, like many of these students would be in abysmal places right now. And seeing that happen is reassuring, knowing that she's there, but also concerning, knowing that a person like her doesn't exist in many other DCPS schools. And on top of like having specific social work support for students, there generally is a lack of conversation and a lack of empathy surrounding LGBTQ plus issues in schools. And it's not like a huge problem. There are spaces where LGBTQ plus students feel safe, at least in the schools that I've been to. But I also haven't heard much rhetoric around it on the state board or in my other spaces I've been in around DCPS and in terms of like policy making. So I was wondering what your perspectives on that are and if there are any avenues that you think we could take to bolster general support, especially around mental health for LGBTQ plus students. So that's a question to you guys right now.
I'm happy to weigh in on that. I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, and one thing, I even mentioned it earlier, is school-based mental health or school-based behavioral health program, depending on how it's phrased, I think was a really valuable tool for this because rather than just kind of just having like a counselor there, that was supposed to provide, more one-on-one activities with students that could really be struggling with something, whether it be, an issue related to LGBTQ plus issues or how that affects their relationship with parents or family members. To provide that support, I think is really important. What I'm interested in knowing more about is, do you have, maybe it's not at Walls, maybe it's other concerns. I mean, always a concern in this area would be potentially bullying issues. Do you see that much as a concern? And should that be something that we're looking at other than just behavioral health services, is like bullying prevention as a systemic issue, or do you not see much of that? I'm honestly not sure.
I think at Walls, I haven't seen a whole lot of bullying. I think that Walls is a lot different from a lot of other schools.
Yeah.
But I do think that bullying in general, like emotional violence that I do see, does often revolve around like trans kids, which I think is definitely a concern. Like there's little emotional violence or bullying or whatever word you want to use toward like non-trans kids, but like the discrepancy is noticeable to me and to my peers. And I imagine that in places that are like less openly progressive and less openly welcoming, it would probably be more. And I don't know what that looks like in other schools, but I would be curious to keep thinking about that.
Distinct points. One, it was the State Board of Education.
So Fraser, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. And I think that that is critical. Like I think that's a really good question, Representative Goulet. And like, and just to give you a backstory here on that, like in Ward 1, I've worked with a couple different groups and a couple different organizations to like update DCPS's bullying policy around LGBTQ youth in particular. And then I do wonder, by reaching out to other stakeholders to kind of see what the PTSB is doing, and also kind of getting a sense of how DCPS is being proactive in like promoting like an LGBTQ friendly culture, we can make recommendations around what next steps would be useful. I know that the SAC has weighed in on this in the past, and it could be another great place for them to provide leadership on updating policies that haven't been updated in over a decade.
That I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing that I would like to add is making schools a place of reassurance and safety in DC for students, because states like Virginia are rolling back their protections, as I'm sure you guys know, for LGBTQ plus students aggressively. And I think that it's important that as a system, we say, like, we are not one of these states, like, you're still safe here. I think that just that would make a pretty significant difference. And I also have skimmed this resolution that you sent, Darren, and it looks to me focusing mostly on like sexuality and not gender. Whereas my main concern with this is like gender. I think that because like gay people have been around for a lot longer, and then gender diversity is kind of a newer thing, students and communities are having a harder time adopting that, at least what I have seen. So I think that if we were to focus on something, it would be that.
Yeah, thank you for raising that issue. And I think we just need to figure out what next steps could look like. I'm gonna need to jump off the call. So Darren, the only other issue that we have not talked about on the agenda is just an overview of the chronic absenteeism map. And then I will plan to touch base with members at the working session. But feel free to reach out if you have additional questions or things that we need to discuss.
Yeah, I have to go off too. We need to get to work on the other place, Ben.
That will
Okay.
negate quorum, so I think we all need to get off then. And
No, I think well, yeah,
2 members isn't enough.
okay.
I
Well,
think.
I think this is enough to go to the working session with. Thank you all so much.
Sure. See y'all soon.
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have fun
Thanks.
testifying.
Bye.